If I open this file on the browser, this is the result we'll get from our HTML and CSS. Right now you can see this tool is not functional. So we'll open our JavaScript file and start making it functional. I'll first start by selecting the elements we'll be needing to interact with from the DOM. First, I'll grab the frame. Then I'll get the selector. Last, I'll grab the selectable elements. Right here, I'll do a query selector all because I want to select every item with the class element. Looking at this tool again, we have three main events or phases, and in each of those phases, we must run code to make our tool function the way we planned. So phase 1 is when you first click anywhere inside this selection area to select or unselect elements. In this phase, we want to know exactly where you clicked so that we can position our selector accordingly. To start phase 1, I'm going to go back to VS Code and I'll write down frame.add event listener. I'll listen for a mouse down event on our frame. And then I'll take the event as an argument of this function. I'll just log it to the console. Okay. Now we're going back to Chrome and then I'm going to open my DevTools. Let's expand this a little bit. Now if I click anywhere in here, we will see a mouse event. So looking at this event, we have a bunch of properties here. The only properties we'll be looking at is the client X and client Y. We'll also be looking at the offset X and offset Y, and then the target property. So the client X and client Y gives us values relative to the viewport, and offset X and offset Y gives us where we clicked relative to the event.target, to the element we clicked on. For example, if I click on this element right here, assuming this element is of width 200 pixels, so the middle will be like 100 pixels. And if I click inside here, I should get an offset X of around 100 pixels. Now that's not what we want because we only want where we clicked relative to this frame right here. For example, in the middle, this frame is of 800 pixels width, so it's supposed to be 400 pixels. In the X, offset X is supposed to be 400 pixels. But when I click right here, it is still supposed to be 400 pixels in offset X, but it's not going to be. And the reason why is because in CSS, every child element is a layer above its parent element. A trick though we can do is we can bring the frame up front, basically a layer above its children. So like that, when we click, we will be clicking the layer of the frame. One drawback we have with that is if the background of the frame is not transparent, we can't see the elements that are behind it since we positioned it on top of its children. So now, as we can see, offset X is clearly not the way to go here. What we'll do is, since client X doesn't help us alone, what we'll need to do is that we will need to figure out a way to calculate exactly where we clicked. So we are going to use client X and client Y to help us. But few other properties we need to do is, what if we could know the position, like what if we could know a whole lot of information about the frame, about its position in the viewport. So if basically what I want to say is, if we could know the distance between the left edge of the frame to the left edge of the viewport, basically this distance right here, and if we were to click here and we get client X will be the distance between this point and this point right here, and if we can get the distance between here and here, we can subtract this distance right here from the e.client X that we get, and then it will give us the value from this point to this point. Again, if you don't understand what I'm trying to say, we are just going to jump back to VS Code and we'll see what I'm talking about. So I'll first start by declaring a variable called start X, which will be equal to e.client X, and then I'll say let start Y be e.client Y. Okay, so these are the values of where we clicked relative to the viewport, the body element basically. So now what we want to do is that we want to subtract the distance between the viewport and where this element started. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const maybe position. No, I'm just going to say, instead of that, I'm going to say left is equal to frame that get bounding client rect. So the left property in this is going to return an object, and it will contain a left property. So I'm going to grab that property, and then I'm going to say, let me bring this to the top. So I'm going to say that start X is equal to now e.client X. I'm going to subtract the left property, and then I will also take the top, which is the distance between the top window and the top of our frame. So I'm going to say minus top. Oh, not top, actually, it's called left, right. Yeah, I think it's called top. So I'm going to say top, and then let's console log these values. Okay, start X and then start Y. So now if I click in the middle right here, we can see the X is around 400 pixel, what we expected. And then we can see also the Y value is around 400 pixels. And this frame is of start Y, I wanted to say. So if I come back here again and then I click where I think this is the middle. So we have 402 pixels and 238 pixels Y. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is, now I have found out the actual positions where my selector should start. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to say selector.style, not that style, that left is equal to a string literal. I'm going to put in start X and then pixels, and I'm going to say selector that style, that top, start Y in pixels, okay. So now we are not completely done with phase 1 yet, but we are getting there. I'm gonna move to phase 2, and then we said phase 2 is when you move your mouse to select and unselect elements. So to start phase 2, I'll just do frame that add event listener. I want to listen for a mouse move. I'll get the event. So in this phase, what we want to do is we want to actually know where you moved your mouse to also. And what we'll do, if we know that information, we want to expand or shrink our selector. And we also want to select, basically highlight or unhighlight elements, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to start first by saying const current x e that client x. I'm going to say const current y e that client y. So now we have the values again where we are, and again we said we want to know exactly where you clicked relative to the frame. So I will need to redo this calculation again. I'm gonna say, let's just copy paste this. No, actually, I'm gonna say left. I'm going to say top, okay. And then if I come down here, what I'll do is I will now try to calculate the width. So I'm going to say let width. This is the width of our selector. And the way we calculate the width of our selector is we want to subtract the width of our selector. For example, if I click here and drag up to this point, the width is the distance between those 2 points, okay? So now what I'm gonna do is, like as you can see right here, we only have access to the current x and current y, basically where we are right now. So to solve this, I'm going to come back here, and instead of making these local variables, I'm gonna make them global variables. I'm going to come back here. I'm gonna say let start x, okay, equal to 0. Let's just say equal to start y, which is equal to 0, okay? So now inside our function we can access these values. So if I come here, I can say now width is equal to current x minus start x, and I can say let height be current y minus start y. Okay, so let's just say let's just give width to this selector, that style, that width, so we can just see what it looks like. Width in pixels. I'm gonna say again the height, that height, is equal to height in pixels. Okay, now if I come here, you can see we are kind of getting there, but we have a problem because as soon as I start moving my mouse, this is just happening, and I didn't even have to click, and this is getting calculated. And basically this is not what I want. Like, this is not what I want, because I'm moving my mouse, I didn't even click inside, and we have this selector expanding. And so we want a way to prevent this. So to prevent this, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to come back here and declare a variable called mouse down, which by default is equal to false. This value is going to help us track if the mouse is down. Mouse down is equal to true when you press it. But when you are moving, I want to make sure you pressed the mouse down first. So I'm gonna say if not mouse down, return, like don't run this function. If you come here and you didn't click, this will not be set to true, it will be false. And if you move just inside here, we'll evaluate mouse down, and by default mouse down is false, so the inverse of false or the reverse of false is true, so it will return. Because this condition is true, it will just return right here. So now we can go back and see if I move, nothing is happening, but if I click and then start moving, as you can see, we are kind of getting there. Our selector is getting the right size. Okay, all right, now let me try to move backwards. As you can see, we have a problem. This thing is not moving backwards, and this is reasonable because basically what's happening here is that in CSS there's not a negative width. And so what we need to do to solve this problem is we need to know when actually the user is trying to go to the opposite direction. Instead of expanding forward, we need to know if the user is trying to expand backwards. Okay, and the way we know that is, for example, if I click right here, this is my starting position. Okay, and this is my current position. All right, so now as I move back, my current position is changing, but my starting position is always the same. And as you can see, the closer I shrink it, the closer my current position is being lesser than the starting position. For example, if I were to bring my mouse up here, even though that this element is not doing what it's supposed to do and like go backwards, you can now notice that our current position is less than our starting position, which was right here. Okay, our starting position is right here and our current position is right here. So if this is the case, we know that the user is trying to reverse the selection. Okay, so what I'm gonna say is I will come here and I'll say if current x is less than start x, I'm going to do something. Okay, and then I'm gonna say also if current y is less than start y, I also want to do something. What I want to do is when current x is less than current y, I want to reverse this. And the way we reverse this is by saying selector dot style that left is now equal to the current position. Okay, the current x, and then I'm going to say selector that style instead of that, I'm going to recalculate the width. Okay, the width now is equal to start x minus current x. I'm going to copy this and instead of saying left, I'll say top. I'll say here y. I'll say current y to start y, and then I'll modify the height. Okay, now if we go back here and try that one more time, we have a problem because it's saying we can't access width before we initialize it. So we'll need to move these up here and then save and retry. Okay, so right here, we still can't get that. So let's see. Oh, I forgot to write pixels. Right here too. These values need to be in pixels, guys. Okay, now if we try once again, we can see we have got it. Like, it is flexible. Oh my god, we have a problem again. Okay, now if we retry this tool, we have made it flexible. We have made it functional the way we want. Okay, but the only problem right now we have is that these elements down here are not getting selected, and we'll get back to that later. But for now, let's just enjoy the fact that we made this tool flexible. Okay, now you can see if I try to go outside the borders, it stops, because as soon as movement stops inside the frame, it will stop growing. Okay, all right. If I try to select and then let go of the mouse, you can see this selection is not happening, and also the selector is not disappearing. And that's why we need to move to phase 3 before we come back to phase 2, so that we can make this selector item disappear. Okay, now I'm gonna start phase 3 by saying frame.add event listener. I will listen for a mouse up event. This is when you let go of the mouse. We'll fire this event and we'll run this function. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I will say mouse down is equal to false. And why I'm saying mouse down is equal to false is because if you let go of the mouse, I want to say when you move the mouse now, I don't want nothing to happen. And next, I will reset the values I set earlier for the selector, starting with the width to 0, and then I'll reset the height. Next, I will reset the top, and then I'll reset the left selector here instead of selection. Okay, so now if we try to do the same thing again, the selection disappears and we have gotten what we wanted. Right now our selection tool is working the way we want it to. The only problem or the only thing that's missing from here is that elements are not being highlighted, and we want to go ahead and implement that. So I'm gonna go back to my code editor and I will comment out this code, and then I will go back to the browser and I'll start selecting. So if I do this and then I just exit out the area, you can see we have the selector in blue and then the elements that are supposed to be selected. Right now our selection tool is working the way we want it to. The only problem or the only thing that's missing from here is that elements are not being highlighted, and we want to go ahead and implement that. So I'm gonna go back to my code editor and I will comment out this code, and then I will go back to the browser and I'll start selecting. So if I do this and then I just exit out the area, you can see we have the selector in blue and then the elements that are supposed to be selected below it, okay? And before we select these elements, we must first of all detect if they are selected, okay? As you can see, all these elements are supposed to be selected, and the reason why is because every one of them has a part that is inside of our selector. So to do that, what we will need to do is we will need to use the bounding client rect function so that we can get the object describing the positions of every element in relations to the viewport. So for example, if I look at this first element, I can say it is selected because the right side of our selector, basically this distance, okay, is greater than this distance. And not only that, also the selector's left, okay, basically this distance right here is less than this distance. If now you draw like few lines here, you can see this part of this element falls inside, okay? So we can say that this element falls inside the selection area, so it has to be highlighted, okay? And we also need to consider the top, basically the selector's bottom, this distance here must be greater than the element that top, this distance, and also the selector's top, this distance right here, is less than this distance. Okay, so this means now the element must be selected. And if you try to apply the same logic for every single element right here, you can see the same result, okay? So now we are going to move back to our code editor and I will start implementing this, okay? I'm going to uncomment all of these and then I'll come down here. I will say elements that for each. For every element, I want to check if it is selected every time we move the mouse or every time we expand our selector. So I'm going to get the element. What I want to do now is I want to get the position or the bounding client rect object that will be returned. So const, I'm going to say chords, basically for coordinates. I'm going to say element that get bounding client rect. So this will contain the top, left, bottom, and right, and also other properties. So I'm also going to take the coordinates for the selector chords. I'm going to say selector that get bounding client rect. Okay, so and then I'm going to come down here, and then I'm gonna say if selector that right, oh no, selector chords that right is greater than the coordinates for the element that left. Okay, I'm going to say and if this is true, and also the selector that left, the selector coordinates left is less than the coordinates of the element that right, okay, then this means the elements should be selected, okay? But this is not the only thing. I will also say if the selector chords that bottom is greater than the coordinates that top, and the selector that top is less than the coordinates that bottom, so I'm just going to split this. So in this case, the element is selected. So what I want to do, I want to go ahead and add the highlight class to the element. So I want to say element.classList.add. I'm gonna add the highlight class we defined in CSS, this class right here. This class right here, which is going to make the element a much darker pink. And now if this is not the case, if this is false, I want to go ahead and remove it, okay? So that remove the highlight. Now if this element doesn't contain it, it will just skip it. If it contains it, then it will be removed. So now if we come back here and we try running this, as we can see, it's still not working. Let me resave this again, and we are going to check it out. It's still not working. I'm not sure why. Let's examine the code once again. let me see if I added the class the right way. This thing is still not working. I'm going to open my developer tools and I will check the elements. So as we can see, some of these elements are getting the highlight class, but I don't know why it's not highlighting them. We'll resave again. As we can see, they are still getting the highlight class, but they are not being highlighted. Okay, so I think what's happening here is that the highlight class is very down here, and this is because of CSS specificity, I guess. It's just both two classes, they are not being any specific. So let me bring this one down here and we can see now it is working. If I come out, as you can see, the elements are not getting highlighted. Okay. Ooh, the project is definitely working the way we want. Okay. So if we let go of the mouse, selection stops, selection starts, we selected the items, we can select these ones, unselect these ones, and yeah guys, alright, so we are at the end of the video guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, hey, please let the algorithm know. Subscribe for more content like this, and comment down below to ask questions or just leave feedbacks. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.